Hi, I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, my loves. I am Laura Nichols, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour, and I am going to help you ignite your life with unfiltered motivation. Each first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific time and 3 p.m. Eastern time, I will be discussing some small but very potent nuggets of truth from my book, Notes from Your Coach, to help you create the life that you want to be living. So let's get into it. Last week was the first show, and I just want to thank everybody who reached out after listening. I got some really beautiful emails and some beautiful texts and comments on social. And so thank you for the support, and I hope to continue this for a long time. So today in this episode, we are going to look at one of the anchor quotes from the book, Notes from Your Coach. In fact, this is actually a very special episode for me because it's the very first quote that I wrote in the book. So let me give you a little bit of background about this book. So when I started in coaching a couple of years ago, I started sort of writing these quotes as an ode to my clients' journeys, as well as an ode to my own personal development journey. Things that just resonated, things that I thought of as my clients were walking through. And I started to share them on social media. And so and then added some commentary to them. And then at some point I thought, well, I have a lot of quotes here, so maybe this should be like in a book or something. And so that is how the Notes from Your Coach book came to be. And so this quote for today's episode is the very first one I wrote. And that quote is, "You are your greatest asset." And so I want to give a little bit of background on where this quote came from. So if we backtrack a couple of years ago, I shared this in my last episode, but I'll share it again. I was a school counselor for 15 years and I got really burned out. And so when I took my leave of absence and tried to figure out what the next thing I was going to do was going to be, I ended up landing on coaching after a lot of sort of like self-reflection and seeking sort of what I wanted to do. And coaching was such a no-brainer for me because really it's very much similar to counseling. It's like a cousin. It's very similar with the idea, the one main difference being that it's really action-oriented. And so coaching was easy. I didn't have a problem. I loved coaching. I did go ahead and go into a training program because even though I had my master's for counseling, I wanted to make sure I was doing coaching the correct way, the right way. And that was easy. It was not an issue. The issue came when I had to figure out how to start a business, right? I had been a school counselor. I got a steady paycheck. If I had a bad day in school counseling, I still got paid as long as I showed up. And it's very different. And so when I started to run my business, I was paralyzed because I didn't know what to do, right? There's marketing, website, business cards, right? There's so much money that comes into doing a business. Even if it's a business that's not like a storefront with an overhead, there's still coaching programs and gas to go to networking events, paying your own coach, right? And so then you throw in also, I was also a single mom, so I'm also paying for food and clothes and sports and activities for my boys. And so going from a steady paycheck to one where I was trying to make money doing a business, it's not necessarily the recommended path. A lot of times coaches will start off doing coaching on the side while they're working full time, but that just wasn't my path. And so here I was doing something that came very easily while also doing something that I had no idea what I was doing. And so it really challenged my money story in a very real way. because I got very panicky. I didn't know where money was coming. I had been married for a really long time previously. And while we dealt with money issues, we were really good partners and we always figured it out. So this was the first time that I was really doing this on my own, and also having to create wealth on my own. And so I was kept stuck a little bit by imposter syndrome, which we're going to get into later. And it really wanted to keep me from making any moves. Now, I didn't let that happen. I made a very important decision very early on to not let fear lead me to decisions. I've always told myself that I was going to make decisions based on power, not on fear. And that came from a lot of the previous pivots that I had done in my life before, coming out later in life, moving, and ultimately leaving my job. So I made a decision that I was going to make decisions through power and not fear, and that allowed me to propel forward. But imposter syndrome is very real. So I knew that I had imposter syndrome. I was familiar with it. And I knew that I had to sit with it and sort of figure it out. So I went to my go tos, which is meditation, yoga. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of books. I did a lot of journaling. And so while I was going through my training of how to coach, in order to figure out how to do the business, right, I was sort of educating myself in a different way. And I do a lot of creative writing. And while I was journaling, one day, this quote came to me. Like I wrote down, like, I am my greatest asset, right? Like I may not have $1 million in the bank necessarily. And don't get me wrong, like I was very privileged. Like in my previous life, I did a lot of work on saving money. So I had some money to pull from. But I was by no means necessarily insanely wealthy, right? So I wrote, I am my greatest asset. And I started to wonder, like, what if I really viewed myself as my greatest asset? What would that look like for my business? How would that transform the way I went about learning to run a business? What decisions would be made if I leaned into this idea? And so when I started asking myself those questions, several things transformed. One, my business became very me centric, meaning it was a lot less about what I didn't know and way more about what I already knew and trusting my intuition and knowing that I was gifted with this brain that had the ability to figure things out. And so I infused myself into my business, knowing that if I am, in fact, my greatest asset to this business, then I need to be in the middle of it. What did I want it to look like? Who did I want to surround myself with? Who did I want to model it after? What mentors did I want to have? And really be able to focus on my business as an extension of me. It also kept me from hiding. So stepping into the power of realizing that I was my greatest asset for this business, it kept me from hiding. I went ahead and I made a website and I did business cards, and were they perfect? No, but I didn't allow it to keep me in inaction. Knowing that I was my greatest asset, I also knew that I would figure it out, and my brain was powerful, and I was going to figure it out. And so it didn't allow imposter syndrome to keep me in that procrastination stage where you just don't do anything or sitting in inaction. Also, stepping into the idea that I am my greatest asset in my business, it allowed me to invest in myself, right? Knowing that I needed to invest in coaching. Like if I was going to be a coach, I also needed to get coached. I needed to invest in a program to make sure that I knew what I was doing so that I could show up for my clients and really create this business that was at the time a baby, right? I took time to focus on me and what I want in this business, journaling and meditation, and really sitting and dreaming about what I want the business to look like ultimately and starting to develop it that way. And it also gave me permission to see myself as an expert. It allowed me to see everything that I had done in my life and all of the journeying that I had done thus far and see it as expertise, and know that those were skills and strengths that I had, and seeing that um, my weaknesses were things I could work on because I had the skills to do the hard things. I had been through plenty of things. I had been through lots of changes. I had finished a master's degree in counseling, been a mom, moved um, to different states, right? Dealt with health issues, um, ultimately coming out and changing my career. And so I gave myself permission to know that I am, in fact, an expert and I could step into this role as CEO because I was my greatest asset. And so we're going to spend some time in the rest of this episode talking about what it looks like to start treating yourself as your greatest asset. Why is this important? And how is it going to change your life to look at yourself from that perspective? So, what are the things that can happen when we look internally at ourselves rather than for external validation from the rest of the world? What kind of power is created when we go inside and look at ourselves as our greatest asset rather than looking outside of ourselves? So much in this world teaches us to look external. And I really want to take the time in this episode to go inside and see where you can pull from what you have to show yourself that you are your greatest asset and how that informs your life, whether it's in a business or whether it is in your relationships or whether it's in your home life. And so that's what we're going to spend the time doing for the rest of our time. And I can't wait to get into more of it. You are listening to Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, and we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to explore more about this whole idea of what it looks like to step into asset energy, right? So stay tuned, and we will be right back. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols. And today we are going to talk about the quote, or I guess we are talking about the quote, "You are your greatest asset," from the book Notes from Your Coach. Before we continue, though, I want to make sure everyone knows how to contact me. If you're interested in knowing more about my work or where to find the book, you can see all of that in the show notes, or you can just go to my website, notesfromyourcoach.com. It's all there. There is even a quiz on there to take if you are thinking that you might be ready to make a big life pivot. Take that quiz, see where you're at, see like where to go from there. So let's get into talking about stepping into asset energy. So what happens when you actually start treating yourself as your greatest asset? And what does that even mean? So when we're looking at an asset, right? An asset is a valuable thing. Simply put, that's the easiest definition that I can give you for what an asset means. When you're looking at, we live in a very financial oriented society, right? Capitalistic. And when you're talking about assets, typically we're talking about it in a financial sense, right? So property ownership, cars, businesses, anything money related like retirement, right? And so that's the classic view of when we're talking about assets. So when we have something external like that we're talking about as an asset, you can see what people value by where they spend their time and where they spend their money. So for instance, when you're looking at a car as an asset, right? If you think about realtors and how they drive clients around their cars, they are detailing the inside, they are washing the outside on a regular basis, right? They are taking care of that asset. They're taking it to the mechanic to make sure it's running smoothly, doing the 30, 60, 90 K, tune-ups, that sort of thing, right? Sometimes assets have a special place in our home. Like, so for instance, growing up, we always had china that was only used for the holidays and like really nice, heavy, utensils and silverware. And they had a very special place in our home. And we only used them during holidays. And they were hand washed. So we took care of them differently than we would have taken care of something that was a little less valuable. Now for me, now I don't have that in my world. I just use the same plates every day. It's just not something I value. But when you have something that is valuable, something physically valuable, it may have a special place. It doesn't have to even be expensive, right? something that's an asset to you could just have sentimental value. So, for instance, I have my grandfather's flannel shirt still hangs in my closet to this day because that is something of value. So it has a special place. And there's picture frames in the special places or notes from my kids as they've grown up, right? Those all have there's a special drawer where I keep those things, poems that have been written by a partner. Or I was thinking about this earlier when I was a kid, like what did I consider an asset? And for me, it was the collections of rocks. I had a lot of collections when I was a kid. They all were kept in a specific shoebox in a specific part of my closet. I had a shoebox full of rocks. I had a shoebox full of little bear figurines. I had a shoebox of bouncy balls that you could find out of a little coin thing, right? I had a shoebox of shells. And if anyone remembers this one, will like write in and tell me because I'm super interested. But I had a shoebox full of Garbage Pail Kids. Man, that was something that I found really valuable. And I don't even know why, because Garbage Pail Kids were like super gross. My mom kept throwing them away and I kept pulling them out in the trash to keep them. But that's what I valued as a young kid. And so they had a special place in my home. So how do we treat assets? What does that look like? And how does it inform treating ourselves as our greatest asset? So let's get into it. So we value it highly, right? So for instance, like you're taking your car in to get it repaired. You recognize the worth and the importance. Like you wouldn't let a valuable stock or a piece of property go neglected, right? You have to understand your own value and treat yourself accordingly. So what does it mean to value yourself highly? You take the time to appreciate your strengths and your talents and your unique qualities. So as I stepped into my business, like I said, I took the moment to see like, what am I good at? I'm really good at coaching. I'm really good at showing up authentically. I'm really good at creating a safe space for people to be able to be authentic and step into investigating themselves, right? So that is what I know are my strengths. So then I'm going to prioritize the self care as I step into my greatest asset energy. Like I'm going to prioritize taking care of myself and my well being. And I'm going to stop undermining my capabilities and start believing in my potential. Right. Another thing that we do when we look at creating our greatest asset energy is that we invest in it. Right. It's just like retirement. So if you're looking at retirement funds as an asset, you're every year going to be adding to it as much as you can so that it grows and grows and grows exponentially. So when you grow an asset, you have to invest in it regularly. So for yourself as a person, that means putting in time, money, energy to develop skills or mental health and physical well-being. So for instance, this looked like for me the coaching program or investing in mental health. A lot of times when my clients come to me, they say something like, I'm investing in myself here. And my favorite is when my clients will give themselves coaching as like a birthday present or a Christmas present that they're giving to themselves. Because what it shows me is that they are willing to invest in themselves and they're already stepping into that greatest asset energy, right? It also looks like taking care of your physical well-being, investing in that. I pay for a monthly yoga membership. I love yoga. It is a big part of my physical well-being and my mental well-being. And I invest in a studio that I love and adore because I'm investing in myself. So you're taking courses, you're engaging in personal development, you're surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, right? So not only are you investing in yourself, but you're investing in relationships that ultimately will give back to you as you give to them, right? You're pouring resources into an asset so that it flourishes. It's just like watering a garden, right? You're planting seeds and you're watering the garden so that eventually it grows. How else do we step into treating yourself as a greatest asset? So you're going to protect it. So for instance, I always said that when I bought a house, I would always have a garage. Our first house that we bought when my ex-husband and I were young was a condo, right? No garage. And this is a very like privileged thought. So I'm going to go ahead and recognize that now. But I always said that I always, as best as I could, would have a garage. And so when I bought my own house, I bought a house with a garage. And you guys, I'm the only one on the street, I think, that parks in the garage. Everyone else has stuff in their garage. But I told myself that I was going to park in my garage because I was going to protect my asset. right? Like I was going to safeguard it. So my car is in that garage as much as possible. And that just protects it from unnecessary depletion. So what does that look like? Well, let's cycle back a couple years when I got super burned out from school counseling, right? I was not doing what I need to do to safeguard myself, my asset from physical burnout, mental burnout, emotional burnout. And so now what that looks like is setting healthy boundaries in relationships, right? Making sure that when I work, I'm working in very specific hours and that I have a sleep schedule, right? Learning to say no to things that drain me or don't align with my values so that I can preserve my energy and focus on things that truly matter. Another thing that we do with our assets is we monitor and evaluate them regularly, right? And this is not about judgment. This is just to say, this is where I'm at. So, for instance, my money, my assets, I have regular meetings with my financial guy, right? I'm not the expert. I pay someone who is, and he and I meet and talk about where things are, where I want to see them go, what we need to do financially, right? Track the growth and progress over time. And this is no different when you're stepping into greatest asset energy on your own, right? Um, I also get coached regularly so that I can engage in sort of my regular self reflection and personal check ins. Where am I? Where do I want to go? I'm asking myself questions like, am I moving toward my goals? Am I feeling fulfilled? Do I need to change my approach? What needs to change here? And this is sitting with the energy of curiosity and not judgment. Another thing that I do, or that we all do with our assets, is we diversify, right? You hear that over and over again. When it comes to financial assets, we are looking at property, mutual funds, like our portfolios are in a lot of different areas. I don't know a lot about this, so it sounds great, but really my financial guy is my expert on this. But with my business, I do the same, right? Like I have my book, I have my podcast, I have one-on-one clients, I'm developing group programs. And so when we're looking at assets, we diversify it. What does that mean when you're looking at yourself as your greatest asset from a personal perspective? Well, are you well-rounded, right? Are you exploring new hobbies? Are you challenging yourself in different experiences? Are you engaging in learning opportunities that don't focus on just one area of growth, right? Are you cultivating a well-rounded life? Another thing that we do is we maintain and repair it when necessary, right? When your car breaks down, you are going to repair it, right? Regular maintenance is crucial to ensuring that an asset doesn't lose value over time. For yourself, this means tending to your mental health, your physical fitness, and your emotional well-being. So self-care practices, therapy when needed, coaching when needed, prioritizing rest and recovery. Just like you'd maintain a valuable property or a car, you have to maintain your well-being. You also believe in your long-term potential, right? An asset grows in value over time. And sometimes we can't immediately see that. And so the small little steps that you take every day for yourself leads to that long-term potential. And so when you step into the quote, you are your greatest asset, you do that by knowing that the small decisions you make daily are going to have an end result, massive compounding effect, just like a retirement fund would. And then lastly, you're really celebrating wins, right? You have to be celebrating wins along the way. Like if you are your greatest asset, right? Take the time to recognize when you've made strides in your personal growth, complete a goal, and overcome a challenge. This is actually one of my hardest things that I do and I struggle with. I struggle with celebrating the small things, and there are reasons for that. So celebrating helps us move forward and continue growing, and not celebrating is really normal, and there's reasons behind that, and we're going to get to that in the next section. So right now, we're going to take a short break. I'm Laura Nichols, known as Queen of the Pivot, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach. When we come back, we're going to talk about why we avoid treating ourselves like the amazing assets that we are and how to handle this resistance. So stay tuned, and we will be right back. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, and we are talking about the quote from my book, Notes from Your Coach, that says, you are your greatest asset. and how stepping into that quote is going to transform your life. So we talked about a lot of ways that we can take care of ourselves as assets in the last section. But I also want to talk about what keeps people from stepping into this greatest asset energy, right? And one of the biggest things about this is self doubt and limiting beliefs, right? And limiting beliefs are a big part of what I deal with my clients on a regular basis, right? A lot of times people fail to realize that we are our own greatest assets because they don't believe that they're worthy enough, right? So this is where self-doubt and limiting beliefs come in. Self-worth is a big part of what I deal with a lot with clients. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by limiting beliefs. So limiting beliefs are subconscious thoughts or opinions that can strain our actions or decisions. So it's something like, I'm not smart enough, I'll never be successful, this isn't meant for me, right? There's a million of them. And the issue is they're subconscious, right? So sometimes it can be really difficult to recognize them, which is why coaching can be so powerful, because as you're being asked questions that identify your thoughts and feelings about something, they start to sort of bubble up to the surface and you get a really good view of them in a very safe space. So where do these limiting beliefs sort of come from? So limiting beliefs can come from childhood experiences, right? Like that one time that somebody said you couldn't sit at a table, and all of a sudden your mind went to, I'm not cool enough, right? I'm not cool enough to sit at that table. I'm not a cool kid. And then all of a sudden you realize that you're 35 years old and you're carrying around this idea that you're not a cool kid because of one experience. It sounds silly, but that is how simple they can be and how simple they can come, right? It might be comparisons to others. When I was a school counselor, oh man, with the age of social media has changed everything. When I was a school counselor before social media, we had some stuff, but when social media became a thing, all of a sudden we were not just dealing with all the things that were happening in the schools. We were dealing with the things that were happening outside of the schools. Kids comparing themselves to each other, the comments that kids were getting, the bullying surrounding that, right? And so there's a lot of comparison that comes on social media, not just for teens, but also as adults, right? How many times have you found yourself looking at social media and thinking, man, they're on a really awesome vacation. I haven't been on vacation in, a year. Like, and all of a sudden your mind says like there's something wrong, right? Another root cause of limiting beliefs and self-doubt is perfectionism, right? This idea that there is some perfect ideal that we are going to get to and find. And the reality is that perfectionism is just a moving target. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, there's really no such thing as perfect because it all depends on who's talking about it, right? Who's creating this idea of what perfectionism is. And it just leads people to think that they're never enough. When if we could let go of this idea that there is some sort of perfect thing that we're striving for, like that would really allow the pressure to alleviate. Also, another way that self-doubt happens is past failures, right? Things that have happened, and then all of a sudden that just defines who we are. I didn't do this right this one time, and all of a sudden there's no way I'm ever going to do it. And so there's really sneaky ways that limiting beliefs happen. And a lot of it comes, like I said, from the self-conscious. And so we have to start to get an awareness of what our consciousness is and how it's influencing our decisions and holding us back from things. And so one thing to think about is if you journal, if you, I don't know, record your voice on an app, or when you're talking to somebody, whether it's a coach or a therapist or just a friend, it might be really important for you to start to ask yourself, like, what are some beliefs that I hold about myself? Like, what do I think of myself? And what beliefs about myself might be limiting my potential, right? And then the second part of that is, are these beliefs really true? So many times that we have these thoughts that we think are truth, but they're just thoughts and there's not actual fact a lot of times. So being able to start to delineate between what is truth and what is just a thought is one of the first things I work on with my clients when they start working with me. But when we're talking about ways that we are held back from stepping into our greatest asset energy, right? A lot of times this can be fear-based. So fear is one of the greatest forces that keeps people from stepping into their full power, and really recognizing that their own greatest asset. And there's a couple types of fear specifically that keep us from moving and taking action and stepping into our greatest asset energy. One is the role of stagnation, right? Our brain loves to just survive. That's its job. You'll hear me talk about this until I'm blue in the face, but its one job is to keep us alive. And when we recognize it, that our brain loves comfort and it loves through familiarity. It's not going to do anything automatically to step out into something that's going to make it uncomfortable. Because when it becomes uncomfortable, it says red alert, something might be wrong, right? And so it's our brain's natural survival function to just status quo, right? We also sometimes have a fear of failure and rejection that keeps us in our comfort zone, right? And so avoiding risks doesn't lead us to grow, right? We have to be out of our comfort zone. There's a saying at my yoga studio, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you, right? You have to do the things that challenge you, that are going to lead you to be stepping into your power. So one example of how fear manifests and keeps us from stepping into our greatest asset power is, if I try this and don't succeed, what will people think? Or what if I achieve this goal and then I can't handle the success of it, right? Fear of success or fear of judgment. If I put myself out there, people might criticize me, right? Fear also can lead us to procrastination, right? Remember how I said that I decided very early on that I wasn't going to allow fear to be the way I made my decisions. And this is why. Because when you allow fear to keep you from taking action, nothing happens, right? So I could have easily not done my website. I could have easily not done business cards. I could have easily not worked on a logo, right? All of these things that I knew that I wasn't going to be perfect at, because one, I wasn't an expert, and two, there's no such thing as perfection. I did them anyway. And I allowed myself to make decisions from power rather than fear, right? People delay important actions out of fear, convincing themselves that they'll start tomorrow, or maybe when things are perfect, there's that P word again. But tomorrow doesn't often come, right? Tomorrow becomes the next day. And so fear leads us to procrastination. So another question to consider, here's your call to action for this moment. What fear is holding you back right now? What fear is keeping you from taking action? And how would your life be different if you moved through that fear instead of avoiding it? What's the outcome that you would get if you were able to step through that fear? And guys, here's the thing. Courage is not a fun feeling, right? Another thing you'll hear me say over and over. All courage is feeling the fear and doing the thing anyway. And so you have to feel the fear and take the step, right? So not allowing fear to keep you in inaction, knowing the fear is normal, and then taking the step anyway. All right, let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. All right, so imposter syndrome, what is it? So basically, imposter syndrome is basically this phenomenon that we have where even highly capable people doubt their accomplishments, believing that they've only succeeded due to luck, or they're just frauds sort of waiting to be exposed. It shows up everywhere. Imposter syndrome hit me today before this podcast. I thought my brain wanted to say maybe last week's podcast was a fluke and you can't really do this. And it's really normal. It affects everybody. It affects people at all levels of success. Even accomplished professionals and creatives feel like imposters sometimes. And I have noticed as I've been doing this business that it crops up every time I sort of level up into the next thing, right? So there's this sort of constant fear that you're going to be found out, that you're incompetent or that you're a fraud. And so that leads to overworking, under celebrating achievements, and not stepping into opportunities because of fear of failure. And so the inner dialogue, this is how you would recognize imposter syndrome. It would be like, I don't deserve this. I'm not as smart or capable as they think I am. Man, I fooled everyone. It's only a matter of time before I'm caught. Right. But here's the problem: when we don't catch that imposter syndrome is happening, right? It really keeps us from recognizing that we are our greatest assets, because we throw it up to something else, like, oh, it was luck, or somebody else did it, or it wasn't that big of a deal, right? People who have imposter syndrome and deal with it tend to downplay their wins, or they might avoid a leadership position because they feel undeserving, right? It also leads to burnout because people are constantly feeling like they need to prove themselves or overwork to meet some unrealistic expectation. Imposter syndrome is particularly common in women because we have been conditioned in the society. We're taught to undervalue ourselves, and we're taught to be modest about our achievements. And so we are really prone to imposter syndrome. And so, how do we get out of it? Well, here we go again with some questions to ask yourself, right? I want you to think about a recent achievement. Okay. I'm doing the same thing. Did you celebrate it fully, or did you brush it off as luck or a fluke, or you just moved on to the next thing, right? How can you start owning your success more confidently? And listen, this is a challenge for myself, not just you, because I struggle with this all the time. And so I'm right there with you. And so we're going to get into more about how to handle this as we go. This is Laura Nichols, Notes from Your Coach. And we're going to go on a quick break. When we return, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, the real work, the how we do it. How do we step into this greatest asset energy? Stay tuned. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach, and we are looking at how to start treating yourself as your greatest asset. This is the nitty gritty part of the show. How do we do it? So, what does it look like? We talked about recognizing your worth and understanding that you're your greatest asset. But let's dive into the work. How do you start treating yourself in that way? We talked about what it looks like to be an asset, how we treat our assets. And we also talked about why it can be difficult through imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs to step into that. But the question is, like, how do we actually do it? So many of us know that deep down we're valuable, right? There's often a disconnect between knowing our worth and acting like it, right? And it's one thing to acknowledge your potential, but another one to live in alignment with that belief. So we're going to talk about how to bridge the gap between understanding your worth and also making choices that reflect it. And that's the big key here. So the first thing I want to talk about is mindset and why it is so crucial, but that action is really the thing that seals the deal. A lot of times we talk about how important mindset is. In fact, that's a large foundation of the work that I do with my clients, because our thoughts really shape our reality. The things that our brain tells us lead us to having certain feelings, which then lead us to taking actions and lead us to our results. So I am a big proponent of understanding and being aware of what your mind is saying to you, and then choosing if that's working for you or not, and shifting your mindset if needed to. However, mindset alone doesn't create our dreams, right? It's actually the action that comes from the thoughts and the mindset. And those two things go hand in hand. So the action that's based on the thoughts that you're thinking or the mindset that you have is what drives the results. So you can tell yourself you're valuable, but until you make the decisions that align with that belief, it's all just talk. And so this is where you see the difference between the subconscious and the conscious coming in, right? So we have our conscious thoughts. What is our brain saying to us? What are we choosing to believe? But the problem is sometimes we're fighting a subconscious that is telling us something else. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a lag between what we say we believe and what we actually believe. And that can be really tricky. So for instance, it's like, imagine you deserve a raise, right? But you never actually ask for the raise. So your belief of knowing you deserve a raise doesn't come into reality because you don't step up and take the action. So how do we do this? How do we make that connection? So making, as I said before, small daily decisions that reflect your worth is really important. Like, for instance, get out of bed. Your running shoes are next. I'm not a runner, but let's say you are. Your running shoes are next to your bed. You put them on and you go for a run, right? It's easy to go for a run. It's easy not to go for a run. Um, or for me, a walk in the morning or getting up and going to yoga, right? Like, I am worth taking care of. As my greatest asset, I know what that yoga is going to do for me. I know what getting up and out of bed and going to that class and sharing that energy with the people and doing the different, um, the, the whole workout with my body, how that's going to affect me, right? So making that choice is then telling myself that I actually feel that worth that I'm saying that I believe, right? It could be as simple as saying no to something that drains your energy, right? Knowing that you really don't want to volunteer for that PTA meeting and it's okay to say no to that. Or making time for something that actually nourishes you, right? Like meditation or exercising or spending time with that loved one that you really enjoy spending time with or reading that book, right? So taking the small step, it doesn't have to be this massive quit your job and start a business like I did. It can be something much smaller. In fact, those are the more sustainable ways to start to where the rubber meets the road. Those are the sustainable things that are going to start to show you that you are valuable and that you do have greatest asset energy, right? So the next thing is like building resilience, right? When you start treating yourself as an asset, it means that you know that there are going to be setbacks, and that's just part of the game. So remember earlier when I talked about limiting beliefs and how you might have failed in some arena, and then that was it, all of a sudden you're a failure, right? But knowing that small setbacks are just part of the game, right? It's no different than going to the gym and lifting weights and building your muscle that way, right? They build your resilience muscle, but they don't define your worth, right? Your worth is steady. You are worthy because you are a spirit having a human experience, right? You are worthy because you are here doing the thing. Setbacks don't define your worth. Resilience is about getting up when you get knocked down and trusting that you're going to rise again and get back. So, one thing that you can do is to reframe your failures into learning opportunities. Remember how I said sit in the energy of curiosity and not judgment, right? So, what did you gain from this experience? Like, as something happened that was a setback, like, what did you gain? How did you come out better? I just had a meeting with a client earlier, and she's a teenager, and she had a really rough school year last year. And there was some bullying going on. There was a lot of social anxiety. She really struggled to even want to go to school. And ultimately, it changed her trajectory in her education. And today, when I talked to her, I was like, girl, I'm so proud of you. Like, you turned this massive setback and this big lesson into something really beautiful. And it's all because she grew her resiliency muscle. And obviously, she had the support of her parents. And, and then I was coaching her. So there was a lot of help there. But she turned a situation that was a setback and she could have said, I'm a failure. I'm not cool. Kids don't like me, like whatever. I don't belong in school. I'm not a good student. Instead, she dug deep, built her resiliency muscle, and she's coming out on top. So reframing those failures as learning opportunities is huge. What did you gain from the experience, and how is it going to make you more adaptable next time? So now she's going to write a book about how to get through a tough year of school and like what to do. Setting boundaries. This is a huge one, right? Assets do not let themselves get worn down or misused, right? If you are your greatest asset, you are using yourself in the best ways possible, right? Assets are managed with care. Um, we can't be everyone's go-to person because it can be draining and cause burnout. So knowing when to say no, knowing where your boundaries are is a really important one. And you can say no unapologetically. They're the foundation. Boundaries are our foundation for treating ourselves with respect. So assets definitely have boundaries. You're not going to use your car as a boat, right? It would break it, right? So in the same way, you as your greatest asset, you're going to use yourself in the way that's best suited. Prioritizing your well-being. right? You wouldn't let a valuable asset like an investment or, you know, property fall into disrepair. So you're going to take care of yourself in the same way, making self-care non-negotiable. So taking breaks, getting enough sleep, practicing mindfulness, caring for yourself is not a luxury. It's literally essential. So if you are your greatest asset, what does it look like to care for yourself? Um, and then another piece of this is making sure that your goals need to align with your values. If you're setting goals that don't align with your personal values, you're going to end up feeling really disconnected and unfulfilled. So when you're stepping into your greatest asset energy, how do your values align with where you want to be going? Right? How do you hit those goals? Knowing what you truly value and aiming for goals that support those values. So, for instance, like if you value family, but your career goal demands that you work 80-hour weeks, it might be time to reassess. Does your goal support your core values? Or are you chasing something that will ultimately leave you feeling empty? And then how do you align your goals? Start by identifying what values most to you. Is it freedom? Is it time? Is it creativity, connection? And then your goals have to reflect that. And here's a little tip from the coach, right? SMART goals are a good way to make your goals happen. So when we're talking about a SMART goal, SMART is an acronym. SMART stands for the S is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound, right? And this is what creates actionable, realistic goals that are in line with who you are. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of these people who really have stepped into their greatest asset energy, right? Um, my clients do this all the time. I am like the biggest cheerleader for my clients. I had one client who came to me and was just miserable, right? She hated her job. She wasn't loving her life. She wasn't loving the life that she created. And her goal was to figure out how things needed to change. And she didn't say this, but in my mind, her goal was to figure out how to step into that greatest asset energy. What did it look like for her to recognize that she was her greatest asset? So we took a lot of time to figure out what wasn't working in her life, what needed to change. And eventually she figured that out. And we worked towards then how to create the life that was going to lead her to have the life she wanted by stepping into this greatest asset energy and what that looked like. So she embraced which her passion. She started taking care of herself and all of the things that we've talked about in this episode, and ultimately left her job, bought a business, and she's doing amazing things, right? Because she decided to see herself as a greatest asset, right? I have also had clients who realized that they need to be setting boundaries and have started to do so because that was how they were protecting themselves as their greatest asset. And ultimately, a lot of times when they did set these boundaries, their relationships got better, not worse. The fear of failure went out the window and then they became really successful in their relationships because they started realizing they were their greatest asset and had to protect themselves as such. So my clients typically don't wait for others to validate their choices, right? They know what their worth is, they embrace it, and then they make decisions that reflect on their value. And yes, we do that together. Yes, coaching creates the space to ask those questions and to understand their limiting beliefs and forge ahead. But ultimately, they said, I am my greatest asset. Now, what does that look like? So this week, I really want you to make one bold decision that reflects your value. Listen, it doesn't have to be earth shattering, but it should make you feel like you're honoring yourself in a real way. I want you to say, I am my greatest asset. And what is that bold decision that you're going to do? It could be something as simple as speaking up in a meeting or saying no to an extra obligation that you don't want to do, or maybe booking a weekend to get away to recharge or just a day's drive somewhere. Do something that aligns with the fact that you are your own greatest asset. How are you going to step into that energy this week? And what habit or boundary do you need to implement to reinforce your worth? It has been amazing. I am so thankful for all my listeners. As you step back into your human journey, I really want you to remember this week's unfiltered motivation from this episode. You are your greatest asset. You have got this. And in case you need a reminder, you are a badass. Keep rocking it. And until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and always remember the power of the pivot. I'll see you guys next time. Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more notes from your coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on a tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.